As George made his way through the labyrinthine corridors of the healthcare products and services provider, the palpable tension in the air seemed to mirror the weight on his shoulders. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the sterile walls adorned with motivational posters that felt increasingly hollow with each passing day. Amidst the hustle and bustle of his colleagues rushing to and fro, George couldn't help but feel a sense of disquiet gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. The company's gym, nestled inconspicuously in a corner of the building, served as a microcosm of the larger issues plaguing the organization. As he approached the glass doors of the gym, George observed with a furrowed brow the chaotic scene unfolding within. Bodies crammed together like sardines in a can, each vying for a turn on the limited number of machines available. The air was thick with sweat and frustration, the din of discontent rising to a crescendo. George sighed inwardly, his gaze lingering on a petite woman struggling to maneuver through the throng, her face etched with frustration and resignation. He couldn't help but empathize with her plight, knowing all too well the complaints and grievances that had been piling up in his inbox regarding the overcrowding issue. "Hey, George," a voice called out, snapping him out of his reverie. It was his colleague, Sarah, her expression a mixture of sympathy and resignation. "Another day in paradise, huh?" George managed a weak smile in response, though the weight of the situation bore down on him like a leaden cloak. "Seems like the gym's becoming more of a battleground than a place for wellness," he remarked wryly, gesturing toward the chaos unfolding before them. Sarah nodded in agreement, her lips downturned in a grimace. "Tell me about it. I'd had clients threatening to cancel their memberships left and right because they can't even get a decent workout in." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their manager, Mr. Thompson, his brisk footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. His brow furrowed in displeasure as he surveyed the scene before him, his lips pursed in disapproval. "George, Sarah," he began, his tone clipped and businesslike. "We need to address the complaints about the gym overcrowding ASAP. I don't want to lose any more clients over this." George exchanged a knowing glance with Sarah, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on both of them. It was clear that something needed to be done to alleviate the strain on the gym facilities, but whether their voices would be heard in the deafening cacophony of corporate bureaucracy remained to be seen. The airport hummed with the restless energy of travelers rushing to catch their flights, a chaotic symphony of bustling crowds and echoing announcements. George found himself swept along in the tide of humanity, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of deadlines and meetings left behind at the office. As he stood in line at the ticket counter, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and anticipation, George couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of his stomach. It was then that he noticed her, a woman standing at the counter, her face drawn with worry and desperation. She pleaded with the harried airline attendant, her voice tinged with desperation. "Please, there must be something you can do. My daughter's been in a terrible accident, and I need to get to her as soon as possible." George's heart clenched at the anguish in her voice, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Without hesitation, he approached her, his concern overriding any sense of propriety or hesitation. "Excuse me," he interjected gently, offering her a sympathetic smile. "Is everything all right? Can I help in any way?" The woman turned to him, her eyes brimming with tears and gratitude. "Oh, thank you," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm just trying to get a flight to Anchorage to see my daughter. She's in the hospital, and I don't know how much time she has left." George's heart lurched at her words, a swell of empathy flooding his chest. He couldn't fathom the depth of her anguish, but he knew that he couldn't stand idly by while someone was in such dire need. "I have a ticket for the next flight to Anchorage," he offered tentatively, extending it towards her. "Please take it. Your daughter needs you, and I wouldn't feel right keeping it when it could make a difference for you." The woman's eyes widened in astonishment, disbelief warring with hope on her tear-streaked face. "Are you serious?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. George nodded, his resolve unwavering. "Absolutely. Please, go and be with your daughter. I'll figure something else out." Tears spilled from the woman's eyes as she reached out to clasp his hand, her gratitude palpable in the air between them. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you so much." As she rushed to board the plane, George couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him, a quiet reassurance that he had done the right thing. Little did he know, his act of kindness would set into motion a chain of events that would change the course of his life forever. The departure lounge of the airport was a hive of activity, a melting pot of emotions as travelers bid farewell to loved ones and embarked on journeys both near and far. George stood amidst the throng, his gaze fixed on the departure board, his mind racing with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. As the minutes ticked by, George couldn't shake the nagging sense of doubt that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. Had he made the right decision in giving up his ticket to the woman in need? Would he regret missing the important meeting with the TV station for a potential collaboration opportunity? But as he watched the woman board the plane bound for Anchorage, a sense of peace settled over him, a quiet reassurance that he had done the right thing. He couldn't bear the thought of someone in such desperate need being denied the chance to be by their loved one's side in their time of need. Lost in thought, George barely noticed the approach of a familiar voice, the soft click of heels against the polished floor drawing his attention. It was Emily, a co-worker from the office, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "George," she called out, her voice cutting through the din of the bustling crowd. "What are you doing here? I thought you had that meeting with the TV station." George turned to face her, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I did," he admitted ruefully, "but something came up, something more important." Emily's brow furrowed in confusion, her gaze flicking between George and the departure board. "What do you mean?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. George hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain his impulsive decision to sacrifice his own ticket for the sake of a stranger in need. But as he met Emily's gaze, he found himself unable to keep the truth hidden any longer. "I encountered a woman at the ticket counter," he began slowly, recounting the desperate plea for help that had tugged at his heartstrings. Her daughter had been in a terrible accident, and she needed to get to her as soon as possible. Emily's eyes widened in astonishment, comprehension dawning on her features. "And you gave her your ticket?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. George nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. "Yes," he admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. She needed it more than I did." Emily's expression softened, a glimmer of admiration shining in her eyes. "That was incredibly brave of you," she murmured, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Not many people would have done the same. As they watched the plane take off into the distance, George couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him, a quiet reassurance that he had made the right choice. Little did he know, his act of compassion would set into motion a chain of events that would change the course of his life forever. The fluorescent lights of the office flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the sterile walls of the sales department. George sat at his desk, his hands clenched into fists as he awaited the inevitable confrontation with his superiors. The air was heavy with tension, the weight of George's impulsive decision hanging over him like a dark cloud. He knew that he would have to face the consequences of his actions, but he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision to help a stranger in need. As the minutes stretched into hours, George's anxiety mounted, his mind consumed with thoughts of the reprimands and repercussions that awaited him. He knew that he had missed an important meeting with the TV station for a potential collaboration opportunity, and he braced himself for the fallout. Finally, the sound of approaching footsteps shattered the oppressive silence, signaling the arrival of his manager, Mr. Thompson, his expression stern and unforgiving. "George," he began, his voice cold and businesslike, "we need to talk." George swallowed hard, steeling himself for the inevitable confrontation. "Yes, sir," he replied, his voice tinged with resignation. Mr. Thompson wasted no time in getting to the point, his gaze piercing as he leveled a pointed glare at George. "You missed the meeting with the TV station," he stated flatly, his tone laced with disapproval. "Do you have any idea how much damage this could do to our reputation?" George braced himself for the onslaught of criticism, knowing that he had little defense against the accusations leveled against him. "I know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I couldn't just ignore someone in need." Mr. Thompson's brow furrowed in frustration, his lips thinning into a tight line. That may be, he conceded begrudgingly, but you still disobeyed a direct order. I'm afraid I have no choice but to terminate your employment. The words hit George like a physical blow, the sting of rejection cutting deep as he struggled to process the magnitude of his actions. He had known that there would be consequences for his impulsive decision, but he hadn't been prepared for the harsh reality of losing his job. As he gathered his belongings and made his way out of the office, George couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment that weighed heavy on his heart. But amidst the turmoil and uncertainty, a small spark of hope flickered in the depths of his soul, a glimmer of possibility that perhaps his act of compassion had not been in vain. The air was heavy with anticipation as George returned home, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment at having lost his job, but amidst the turmoil, a glimmer of hope flickered in the recesses of his mind. As he settled into the familiar comfort of his living room, the evening news flickered to life on the television screen, the anchor's voice echoing through the room with a sense of urgency. And in a heartwarming act of kindness, a man at the airport sacrificed his own ticket to help a woman in need, the anchor announced, the image of George and the distraught woman flashing across the screen. His selfless actions have captured the hearts of viewers across the nation, sparking an outpouring of support and admiration. George watched in astonishment as his story unfolded before his eyes, a sense of disbelief mingling with a surge of gratitude. He had never expected his impulsive decision to help a stranger at the airport would garner such attention, and yet here he was, the focus of a national news story. As the segment came to a close, George couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the impact his actions had had on others. Little did he know, his act of compassion was about to set into motion a chain of events that would change the course of his life forever. The ringing of this phone broke through the silence, jolting George out of his reverie. With trembling hands, he answered the call, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hello," he ventured tentatively, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Is this George?" came the voice on the other end of the line, the tone filled with excitement and anticipation. "Yes, this is he," George replied, his curiosity piqued. "Who is this?" "It's Jennifer from Channel 7 News," the voice exclaimed, a note of excitement in her tone. "We saw your story on the news, and we'd like to interview you for a special segment we're doing on acts of kindness. Are you available for an interview?" George's heart leaped with excitement at the unexpected opportunity, a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Yes, absolutely," he replied eagerly. "I'd be honored to share my story." As he hung up the phone, George couldn't suppress the grin that spread across his face. Despite the uncertainty of his future, he knew that his act of compassion had opened doors he never could have imagined, paving the way for a new chapter in his life filled with hope and possibility. The morning sun cast a warm glow through the window of George's apartment, illuminating the room with a sense of renewed optimism. With each passing day, George found himself embracing the possibility of new beginnings, eager to move forward from the setbacks of the past. As he sat at his kitchen table, savoring a cup of steaming coffee, the sound of his phone ringing cut through the peaceful silence. With a sense of anticipation, George answered the call, his heart pounding with excitement. "Hello," he greeted, his voice filled with anticipation. "Good morning, George," came the voice on the other end of the line, the tone warm and friendly. "This is Sarah from the local news station. We saw your story on the news, and we'd like to feature you in a segment we're doing on acts of kindness in the community. Are you available for an interview?" George's heart skipped a beat at the unexpected opportunity, a surge of gratitude flooding his senses. "Yes, of course," he replied eagerly. "I'd be happy to participate. Thank you for reaching out." With a sense of purpose coursing through his veins, George set about preparing for the interview, his mind buzzing with excitement at the prospect of sharing his story with the world. Little did he know, this would be just the beginning of a journey filled with unexpected twists and turns. As he made his way to the local news station for the interview, George couldn't shake the feeling of nervous excitement that bubbled up inside him. But as he stepped into the studio and met the friendly faces of the news team, his nerves melted away, replaced by a sense of calm determination. The interview went off without a hitch, with George sharing his story with honesty and sincerity. As he spoke about his decision to help a stranger in need, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride at the impact his actions had had on others. After the interview, George was inundated with messages of support and encouragement from friends, family, and strangers alike. It was clear that his act of compassion had struck a chord with people from all walks of life, inspiring them to pay it forward in their own lives. As he reflected on the events of the past few days, George couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the opportunities that had come his way. Despite the challenges he had faced, he knew that he was ready to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that each new day held the promise of new beginnings. In the aftermath of his newfound fame, George found himself swept up in a whirlwind of interviews, appearances, and opportunities. But amidst the chaos, he couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that lingered in the depths of his heart. As he navigated the bustling streets of the city, George couldn't help but feel a pang of envy as he watched couples strolling hand in hand, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the city. He longed for the companionship of someone who understood him, someone to share his joys and sorrows with. Little did he know, love was about to find him in the most unexpected of places. It was a chance encounter on a rainy afternoon that would change the course of George's life forever. As he sought refuge from the downpour in a quaint little cafe, he found himself drawn to the sight of a woman sitting alone at a corner table, her eyes fixed on the pages of a book. There was something about her that captured his attention, a quiet grace and beauty that set her apart from the crowd. With a sense of determination coursing through his veins, George approached her table, his heart pounding in his chest. "Excuse me," he began tentatively, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mind if I join you?" The woman looked up from her book, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Oh, sure," she replied hesitantly, her voice soft and melodic. As George took a seat opposite her, a sense of nervous excitement coursed through him. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about this woman that felt different, as though they were meant to cross paths on this rainy afternoon. "I'm George," he introduced himself, offering her a warm smile. The woman returned his smile, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "I'm Alice," she replied, extending her hand across the table. As they struck up a conversation, George found himself drawn to Alice in a way he had never experienced before. They talked for hours, sharing stories and laughter as they discovered they had more in common than they could have ever imagined. As the rain continued to fall outside, George couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of events that had brought Alice into his life. Little did he know, their chance encounter would blossom into a love that would stand the test of time, proving that sometimes love truly does find us in the most unexpected of places. As the cafe's closing time approached, they exchanged contact information, each feeling a sense of excitement and anticipation for what the future might hold. In the days that followed, George found himself unable to get Alice out of his mind. Their chance encounter had ignited a spark within him, a glimmer of hope for a future filled with love and companionship. But amidst the whirlwind of emotions, George remained uncertain about his professional future. With his recent dismissal from his previous job looming over him, he couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty about what lay ahead. However, fate had other plans in store for George. Inspired by his act of compassion that had captured the hearts of so many, several job offers began to pour in. Companies from across the city reached out to him, eager to welcome him into their ranks. After careful consideration, George accepted a position at a reputable marketing firm, where his skills and talents would be appreciated and valued. The opportunity for growth and development filled him with a renewed sense of purpose and determination. With a newfound sense of confidence and optimism, George embarked on this new chapter of his life, grateful for the unexpected blessings that had come his way. And as he walked hand in hand with Alice, their love growing stronger with each passing day, George knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be.